Good morning, friends. Today is Monday, June the 2nd, 2025, and the time now is 7:31 a.m. So, friends, when I was a little kid, when I grew up in Africa, I used to notice this, and to a greater extent, I still observe or notice that today whenever I watch the news, Western news outlets, whether we are talking about CNN, BBC, and so on and so on. And something is happening in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, the Americas, and so on. Whenever something is happening, such as a war or a coup, Western news presenters and Western governments often brush it off and say, no, it is an African affair, it is an Arab affair, it is an Asian affair, it is the affairs of the Latin Americans, and so on. However, friends, whenever white men fight one another, whenever the white tribes of Europe fight, whether we are talking about the Germans against the French, against the English, or the Dutch against the Yugoslavian or whatsoever, I'm just making things up here. Whenever white men and white men's countries fight among one another or one another's, they often bring the rest of the world with them. They often bring the rest of the world into their nonsense, into their war. And this was the case with both world wars. We are talking in this case about World War One, World War Two, the Cold War, and so on. World War One was not an African war. Yes, Africans, Asians, Indians get involved because of their relationship with the British, okay? The United Kingdom or the British Empire, however you want to say it. They were dragged into the war, quote unquote, to protect and defend the empire whatsoever. The same empire that turned around, colonized or neo-colonized them. The same thing for the French and for the Germans, okay? Or in this case, let's say, most especially for the French, where we saw French colonial subjects, quote unquote, from Africa. We are talking in this case, Senegal, okay, Mali, and other African countries, where people basically left and go to Europe to defend, to fight for France. This, my friends, was also the case for the Cold War. During the Cold War, the entire world got dragged into the Cold War because of the power, the might of the United States and its Western allies. During the Cold War, my friends, the entire global South wanted out of it. The global South, my friends, in order to stay away from the nonsense of the Cold War, in order to not take side, form a non-alignment movement. Now, many can say and will say that the non-alignment movement basically died as a result of the end of the Cold War. But I do believe, friends, that the Cold War never ended. The Cold War is with us. World War One and World War Two never ended. Why? Because of the thirst for power by the powerful countries in the world. The United States, the British or Britain, the French or France, Germany, and so on and so on and so on. They are still thirsty for power. But now what we are seeing is a ganging up of the Western countries led by the United States against the rest of the world, most especially the global South. But as of current times, we are seeing the ganging up of the powerful countries, France, Britain, Germany, and so on, Canada, Australia, led by the United States. Basically, we are seeing an empire within an empire, or empires within an empire. Basically, we are saying that the United States is the empire, the core, and France, the United Kingdom, Australia, Germany, and so on. They are the periphery and empires of their own. Now, friends, in terms of white men fighting among themselves and bringing the rest of the world with them, perhaps we could be seeing that emerging recently and currently. I'm talking about this weekend, yesterday. We saw a massive attack, okay, Ukrainian attack on Russia. Basically, it is said that about three bases were hit and about five regions in Russia were hit. Basically, the Ukrainians, it is said, once again, the drones in trucks were driven into Russia and placed next to strategic air bases in the Russian military or Air Force Command. These strategic air bases house strategic bombers in the Russian arsenal. It is said that nuclear bombers and other very technical, very advanced Russian planes and so on were housed in these strategic air bases, and Ukrainians basically destroyed them. Now, friends, on social media and even in Western news, many are jubilating about the attack on Russia. Many are calling it Russia's Pearl Harbor. Many are saying that Russia is finished, and many are saying that Putin is finished. Once again, we are seeing ignited the thirst, the call for the heads of Putin for the destruction, the defeat of Russia from the West. People are jubilating throughout the West. Now, we are waiting Russia's retaliation, which could be very dangerous. There are those, and in this case, I'm talking about prominent scholars and observers and commentators on international relations, geopolitics, and so on, who are saying that perhaps the West and the rest of the world are at a point of no return, which basically means that the situation in Russia has just gotten very dangerous, or the situation in Europe between Russia and Ukraine, as backed by the United States and its friends, its allies, the West, that it has gotten out of control and that we in this global community are at a point of no return. Actually, my friends, I do believe we are, and we've been for a long time now, at a point of no return. Perhaps Russia could retaliate harsher. Perhaps Ukraine could retaliate harsher again. But my fear in this case is that what Ukraine is demonstrating is that it could hit Russia however, whenever it wants. Could it be that if Ukraine had decided to use nuclear missiles, or my friends, had Ukraine fitted these drones with nuclear warheads, perhaps very small amount, it could have meant the end of Russia or a very difficult, very bad attack on Russia, worse than what we've seen in the past few hours, which in this case could have enticed Russia to go hard. The Russians have been making threats as well, saying that any major attack, long-range attack by Ukraine into Russia means that the Russians are going to hit Ukraine hard and harder, and that those countries that are backing Ukraine, from which the missiles or the drones or whatsoever is coming from, that hit deep into Russia, are going to be attacked as well. This attack on Russia happens deep into Russia. The Ukrainians sent drones throughout Russia, okay, in regions along the border with Ukraine and in region closer to Moscow, as well as regions within Siberia, Russia. So this, I think, is going to be a wake-up call for the Russians, but I think the Russians are going to retaliate harsher on Ukraine. Perhaps this could then make those in Russia who are basically pro-war, who basically want to destroy Ukraine and end this war as soon as possible with Russia's victory, are probably yelling at Putin saying, we can no longer do this. We can no longer go soft. We need to destroy Ukraine. Perhaps this is going on. And wherever Putin could have been soft on Ukraine, perhaps Putin is going to become much harsher on Ukraine. There has been some allegations of a coup in Russia or whatsoever, and many are celebrating the end of Putin. In a global community, I think what the war in Ukraine is forcing us to do as a global community, and perhaps those of us in the global south, is that Russia has to win. I am saying this based on a geopolitical perspective. As a person of the global south, as an African, we are seeing that those who are now using Ukraine to fight Russia are the same people who've continued and who had in the past destroyed, beaten Africans, from enslaving Africans to neo-colonizing Africans to coming back and making threats against Africans. and using derogatory terms against Africans. Perhaps what this is showing us is that if the West defeat Russia, they are going to destroy Russia. And should they destroy Russia, it means that China is alone. Should they destroy China, then the rest of the world, the global South, can no longer stand up to the West. As a global South thinker, I do believe that Russia has to win. Not so much destroy Ukraine, but to win, to defeat the West. In this case, the defeat of the West buys the rest of the world, the global South, and Africa time to rejuvenate and to become better, to be in a position where it can protect itself against the West, the United States, and France. My question here is, before I end, friends, is the rest of the world, the global South, are leaders in the global South, countries thinking now to begin to formulate a geopolitical perspective or policy, a non-alignment perspective or policy, or a policy that basically entice them to support and defend and promote Russia in this case. Because what perhaps is coming could be another world war where the entire West, as we are seeing, is fighting Russia. This is not Ukraine against Russia. It is the West against Russia using Ukrainian bodies. And this can go out of control. And should it go out of control, what is the position of Africa? What is the position of Asia, the Middle East, Latin America? What is the overall position and perspective of the global South? What we saw happen in Russia, I believe, is not a Ukrainian alone activity. I believe that the United States and NATO, the entire conceptual West, the greater West, is part of this. They push this. I believe, my friends, that we could be seeing an attack by NATO and the United States on Russia. In this case, it seems to me that the United States and NATO are preparing to go to war with Russia. Perhaps this attack on Russian strategic bombers and nuclear arsenal could be a United States, NATO, and the West activities to attack, to destroy Russia's strategic arsenals, so that when a war between NATO, the United States against Russia comes about, that Russia would be in the position where it is ineffective to hit back at the West. This is what the attack on Russia or on Russian nuclear military strategic arsenals or bases appear to be for me. Now, friends, please tell me what you think, and I really want to know what you think. But friends, I am going to end here. I want to thank you for being a member of the Echoing Voice community, my friends, but most especially and most importantly, friends, or most important, I want to thank you a lot for watching the Echoing Voice. Peace, my friends. Peace.